I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Today is a special day. 2 years ago, I made the decision to move my radio show, called Unlocked, to television, called Unlocked. I had been on radio for 3 years. So if I add up 3 and 2, I come to 5 years that I have been running the show called Unlocked, all about building resilient leaders so that we can have more resilience, not only for ourselves, but for our organizations as well. In my work with clients, I always encourage them to celebrate their successes. Following my own advice today, I decided I was going to celebrate hitting this, what I consider to be a real landmark of 5 years. Okay, I'm going to do my celebrating by sharing with you from many of the guests that I've had, small segments that talk about something that was, let's say it was just a great insight or an amazing advice, or maybe it was just that it was clear. And sometimes it's just a funny story. I've done more than 150 unique shows. So obviously, the few that I'm going to be able to show today won't nearly cover the waterfront. And if you are looking for someone and you don't see him or her, let me know. And especially if you want to see them, let me know. And I'll figure a way that I can do something like this again. All I have is 56 minutes, so I can only fit so many in. But I did try to pick ones that would be useful. There are 10 segments across this hour. My first segment is about a vibrant woman from Peru who sets the stage for so many of the issues of today's workplace. It's Dr. Miriam Zylberglait. She likes to be called Dr. Z, and now I know why she likes to be called Dr. Z. She is a triple board certified in internal medicine, geriatrics, and obesity medicine with extensive clinical experience. In addition, she received the award of Mentor of the Year from the AMC in 2022. Dr. Z has a deep interest in the topics of well-being, burnout prevention, mental health, and leadership. She's the author of The 3G Cycle of Life, The Secrets for Achieving Joy, Meaning, and Well-Being. I think you're going to enjoy meeting Dr. Z.
To be altruistic and the world, who knows what was happening in my mind, I neglected myself and I neglected in some way my loved ones. And probably that was the most painful part of it.
So often in our professional lives, we don't pause and realize the payment we have made.
Yes. Today I had a wonderful conversation with someone that I don't know for too long, but at the same time, I believe I am very well connected and someone that I respect and I consider a mentor. And we were talking about this, how so many times we neglect ourselves and how I have been neglecting myself. And even today, after learning so many things, improving so many things, and writing a book where I admit that I am not perfect and that I am learning, but how I continue making some mistakes, creating an environment for myself where I can do things that create joy for me, and instead of just me focusing on what creates joy for others. And that boundary that is so hard for me to put there, that all the time I am jumping. Sometimes I don't even see it, but sometimes I see it and I jump over that boundary anyway, with very good excuses. I can create very good reasons for why I do it. How not having that clear boundary is still hurting me, and in some way hurting those that love me and that want me to be well. Why I say that? Because the process of healing and the process of growing, changing, is not something that we do like this. It's not in a second. We will have moments that we are going fast and furious and we can see the goal there close to us. And there will be times where we slow down or even we go back a little in our steps, and we need to rebuild the strength to continue. We need to be kind with ourselves during that process. And we need to understand, again, that we are not perfect, and we need to be able to be vulnerable, be humble enough to ask for help and to try again. Right. And today for some reason, it's randomly, but today was one of those days where I was really crying and thinking about, okay, what I am doing with my life, how I am doing this again, how I'm repeating the same error. I just changed the scenario, but this time feels easier to go back into my new route, and it's easier for me to find the answers and to get the tools and to identify those that are the right individuals, mentors, friends that I can trust and I can keep close to me.
I love that story, believe it or not, because I think sometimes we anticipate, no, that's not the right word. We expect that when we've learned a lesson, that we will then be correct, always. And when I work with people, I say to them, look, you're going to make mistakes. And at first you'll recognize it after you make the mistake. Then you're going to recognize it while you're making the mistake. And eventually you'll recognize it before you begin. But it takes time.
Yeah, you need to retrain yourself. Someone like me, a physician for more than 20 years, and if you count medical school, we have to add a few extra there, that was told that has to be perfect, that never gets tired, that is never afraid, that doesn't need to go to pee or doesn't need to eat to continue working. Really, or someone in your family is dying, it's okay, you are a doctor. They will understand that you cannot be there. Same for marriages or parties. So your brain, especially in my case, I started young, your brain, you don't have even your prefrontal lobe already and develop, and you are learning certain things that mark your life forever if you allow this to be true. And I did it for 30 years of my life. I thought that I need to be this perfect, not even a human being, this perfect robot. and I will get very proud about that. It's, I didn't sleep for 3 days. Yay! I didn't eat only chocolate and coffee. I am getting to be a great doctor. But I grew up in that culture. We were celebrating how we were getting unhealthy and how we were losing perspective and how we were getting burnout and how we were harming not only ourselves, but also our patients and, of course, our families.
My next guest, my next best of best, is Dan Jones. He's the perfect next segment after we have discovered that such a high-paced life is really not pleasant. Dan Jones is the owner and founder of Moving Stillness Healing Arts, a training business that teaches and promotes the fluid and graceful art of Tai Chi Chuan, Qigong. Dan is a retired law enforcement officer and security professional with over 38 years combined experience. Today, he has a training and education business that specializes in Tai Chi, moving, mindful meditation, a resilience training for first responders, veterans, and people employed in high-stress and high-risk professions with emphasis on PTSD. He is currently the Tai Chi research consultant for Johns Hopkins Medical Center. Dan Jones on the balance of yang and yin.
Some of these people. So I realized that all I was doing was external training, external martial arts, lifting weights. I was all yang. And yang, the term yin and yang, a lot of people have heard it. Yang is physical force, moving forward. Yin is yielding, softness. So because the training was all external and from a yang perspective, it wasn't balancing me. Everything holds its opposite, right? So the only reason you understand yang is because it's yin. So I realized that I needed to study internal. So in 1980, I started studying with a Tai Chi master, and then that became my internal journey. When I did that, I acquired a balance. Everything holds its opposite. If all you do is train externally, then you're not able to understand when it's time to yield, when it's time to be soft, when it's time to listen, when it's time to be still. All you know is yang. If I want to solve this problem, I got to move forward. Everything is the same. So I had to have balance. I was out of balance. When you only know one side, you're vulnerable to the other side that you don't understand. I don't know if I got off topic a little bit. I'm trying to give you a background as to what happens. And most officers don't get my training. As a matter of fact, I transferred to another department after a while because the state police was only highway patrol. And being from Detroit, I wanted more activity. I wanted to be in a city environment. And those officers, when they saw me doing Tai Chi and doing my slow movements, they like laughing. What is he doing? Snickering and everything. They couldn't understand because they had never had that training. So all they have is their own value judgments, what they learn as police officers, and their experience on the road. Now, you hear officers talk about a sixth sense, okay? Now, that sixth sense, yes, they can acquire because your senses get heightened. All of your senses get heightened because you have to be out there in right up front, no matter what. Okay? And all they do is go one speed when they get out there. Now, all these experiences that they have, there's a saying about experiences. One can have 1,000 different experiences or the same experience 1,000 times. So everything they see is from their experience. So they go in and experience, it's good, but it's a hindrance too, because you've experienced this one thing before maybe 100 times, and it's always been the same result. But this one time, which is not what it really is. Now, the only way to be able to differentiate from that is through balance, through internal and external training. That talks, the internal Kung Fu or Tai Chi Chuan is about breath work. It's about the mind, the body, and cultivating this energy called Qi. It's a life force, an internal force. And it's based on traditional Chinese medicine. So it's based on a system that has over 5,000 year history in healing. So it's pretty sound. When you practice from an internal and external perspective, then you acquire a balance mentally, physically, and spiritually. Now, spiritually, I'm talking about your spirit. Some people, they don't have any desire to get up in the morning. Some people are just rainbows and happy all the time. They have their flame is strong. They have a very strong spirit. And when you get beaten down, that spirit weakens. And everything is connected. The mind is connected to the body is connected to the spirit. One is damaged, then all three are damaged to a certain point. Now, the breathing, I can't say enough about mindful breathing, not just breathing. People say, oh, I'm breathing. Yeah, I know. I'm alive. I breathe. Yeah, you are. Okay. But the average person breathes from up here, chest breathing. Okay? And that's life-sustaining. But as far as nourishing all internal organs, having a direct access to your parasympathetic nervous system and to oxygenate all the cells of the body and the brain, I mean, it's abdominal breathing. Abdominal breathing does that. So mindful abdominal breathing, and the posture comes into play too. You can't be all slouchy and do it. You have posture in play. But we put all these things together, yes.
And now I just have to interrupt you because you're just getting to so much. I'm like, whoa, my goodness. I want to come back to the yang and yin.
Okay.
I have never heard it described so simply and clearly that it's the yang is the moving forward, the yin is the yielding. When I think about being in any kind of management situation, there are times when you must be aggressive, you must push and then there are times when you have to listen. And that's, I would assume from what you're describing, that's a yielding. Okay, I'm listening. Let it come to me. I may still come back aggressively and push back. That's really very beneficial to my thinking when I try to help managers learn that listening is a part of management. So I want to thank you for that. Even when we're balanced, there remain those moments in life when we're really uncertain about the future. Dr. David Drake, the founder and CEO of the Moment Institute in California, has worked in the coaching space for 25 years, most notably as the founder of narrative coaching. He has developed a deep expertise in facilitating real change in real time using people's own stories. He's author of Narrative Coaching. He's going to talk about those times when we find ourselves stepping into a new space in our lives, sometimes referred to as the liminal moment. Liminality, the fact that we're in liminal space. I wonder if I always think of it as standing in a doorway. The jambs of the doorway are on both sides of you, and behind you is something that you knew, and ahead of you is something new. Why don't you just talk on that from your perspective?
We teach this a lot in our programs, but one of the things that's challenging for most adults, largely in part because of the way many of us went through school, but the fantasy as adults is that we should know something before we do something. And so if I had surgery for cancer some years ago, yes, I want to know that my surgeon knows what he's doing. And it turned out people actually marvel at the scar I have. It was just like perfect. But the reality is that we live in a time when it's hard to know. And what we're trying to do is to free up our inner 5-year-old skier. And by that I mean, it's the story I tell a lot of my programs. If you were to go to a ski resort and you would go to a beginner ski school and watch, you'd see over here a group of kids all padded up in the whole 9 yards, and then a group of adults who are mostly standing around talking, comparing outfits, whatever. And so the adults are there to learn how to ski. They're not going to really ski until they've learned how to ski. The kids put on the skis and move down the hill. They learn how to ski by skiing. Now, they're shorter. They're not going to get hurt as much as they fall over. But if you think about it, they just go. And then if something doesn't quite work, they go, oh, that didn't work. And then make some adjustments. And then they go. And pretty soon they've learned how to ski. So the difference between people who are learning how to ski and the people who are just skiing is monumental. Guess which group actually learns how to ski faster?
The kids.
Skiing. And so for me, it goes back, but ties to your story about dinner. To simplify our life, I don't want to make that new choice every single night. We know what we keep going back to. Why don't we just start there, get rid of all the consternation before dinner? And so for me, liminality is just so important because we have this fantasy, I should know what to do in the unknown. And the in-between time doesn't really count because it's in between. It's actually the most fertile time we have. Who do I need to become? What do I need to shift in myself or in my life? And rather than sitting in the doorway hoping that things will be different, what little experiments can I create for myself while I'm in this unknown to give me a taste of, I like this, I don't like that. This works well for me, this doesn't. And so in our work in narrative coaching, we don't set goals for later because that assumes we know A, where we want to go, and B, how we're going to get there, which is false for most of us. We just say, so what is it you'd like to be different in your life? And what would that look like for you if you did that? They'll name something. So I would like to be more assertive when I ask for things from my teammates. Great. So what teammate in particular would be a good place for you to start with that? Bob or whatever. So let's imagine Bob sitting there right now. What do you need from Bob? And they go through all their anxieties and their guilt and whatever. And they say, great. So what is happening for you right now? In this liminal space where your old self is wanting to move away and your new self hasn't quite arrived, you're in this in-between spot. So let's practice. And so I might say, let's imagine that we're in a Monty Python movie, like you're the Minister of Silly Walks or the Silly Voices. And they laugh and they start exaggerating and they start having some fun like a kid. And there's no stress, there's no consequence. It's them accessing part of themselves. And so for me, people often, and it's not easy to be in a liminal space, but that's how progress happens, that's how growth happens, is by allowing ourselves to stay in that space, play in that space, as we begin to build the confidence to go create or adapt to what's happening.
As you were describing it, I suddenly realized that the liminal space does not have to be the door jam. which is like you're only there for a moment,
Right.
rather to embrace the fact that this can be a while. Time maybe doesn't even exist in this liminal moment because you
It does
just
not.
take the time. David works with our stories, but I wanted to bring to you Pernille Stockfleth, who's going to explore how storytelling in general is a way to create liminal spaces for our thinking. She is a master storyteller in Denmark. Her work is about finding your voice through story, telling stories in corporate settings to help the heart and the brain reconnect, building community and inspiration. She's known for the stories she tells in museums to help the exhibits come alive. Pernille, the company, what is it that you do? Tell me, just give us some examples.
Yeah, I use storytelling in organizational settings. I've been, in the recent years, I've been telling stories for leaders, actually, where if they have a seminar, CEOs and stuff, people like that, they have a seminar and they're talking about leadership or management, and they're talking about the differences and how to be a good CEO and be an inspiration for the colleagues and workers in their businesses. I show up at nighttime. I've been hired to do this. So I show up at nighttime, not for them to have a seminar in the evening, but to just sit down and have a good story and listen. And of course, we pick together, me and the client pick the stories for that evening so that it will reflect the thoughts that they have been talking about. And I'm mostly talking about Shackleton, the explorer, and a Danish explorer as well, Knud Rasmussen, because their leadership was amazing. They were modern leaders, but I tell it in the form of story, and it inspires them to talk in metaphors the next day. So the next day, when they continue their seminar, they will, or conference or whatever they are doing, they will talk and do references back to that situation that she was talking about yesterday. So for them, it's just a cultural event, but it's not. It's very strictly planned to inspire and to get them to move on.
So often when I'm brought in to work with companies, I'm in there during the day, and of course, what I try to do is give them some time off at night. And yet I love the idea of you coming in to tell a story, because that is definitely giving them a relaxation, and they're not have to focus on their business at that time. And yet you're right. The story brings all kinds of insights. Why do you think story is so powerful this way?
I've been thinking a lot about it. And I think that storytelling is a powerful tool because you talk not so much to the brain, you talk more to the heart, but still you have to use your brain when you're listening to a story. And the heart and brain come together makes a bigger soul, because when combining these things, you have a whole new experience, I think, listening, because it's actually, you're not relaxed when you're listening to a story because your brain is working really hard. It's making all the pictures. It's making an internal movie inside of you, hopefully, if the storyteller is good. And all these paintings and pictures and things work so you are really alert when you're listening, even though you might sit relaxed and stuff. You're working because we're not showing you the pictures. You have to do them yourself.
Yeah.
And I've been telling stories about Second World War, where there was a female heroine here in Denmark, a really wonderful woman that was in the Danish resistance, and she was actually deported to a German concentration camp, Ravensbrück, and on the brim of her existence, she was rescued with big action made from the Danish and Swedish and Norwegian Red Cross and brought home to Denmark, and she survived it. And this story is really a strong, hectic, and emotional story. And I've been telling that stories in settings where historians that have been working with the Second World War as topic of their professional life, and they have, even though that, they have been sitting crying. And after the show, they said to me, "How come that you could make me cry? I know everything about this topic, and still you make me cry." And it's not me, but it's the storytelling that does it. It's not me.
I never thought about the fact that our brains are actually working really hard. I love your imagery of the brain and the heart working together. I got the feeling of it's like having a right hand and a left hand. You can do so much more when you have both hands working.
Yeah.
Let's move now to the applied aspects of the things that we've been talking about. And I want to bring on Tracey Fenton. She's called one of the top minds in business, culture, and organizational design. She's the founder and CEO of World Blue, the premier global leadership membership for CEOs and top leaders who believe in leading with freedom at work. She is the author of Freedom at Work, the leadership strategy for transforming your life, your organization, and our world. Tracey Fenton.
Democracy is choice. So people having a choice in the workplace, and there's certainly a lot of ways to implement choice, but again, let me give you one that challenges the conventional ways of leadership. So conventionally in the way we lead is people go to work and they start at a new job and they're assigned to whoever their boss or manager is. And what happens if you don't like your boss or manager? Like, that ain't so fun. 75% of people leave their jobs voluntarily because they don't like their boss or manager. I think every single one of us can think of a boss or manager we've had through the years that hasn't been so great to work with. One of the stories I tell in the book, in one of the practices, comes from a great company over in the UK, small business, 20 people, and they have a practice where you can choose your own manager. You go to work and you say, "I'm not going to just be stuck with somebody I don't want to work with." And they get to choose who they want to manage them or coach them. There's other words you can use besides manager. And they let the employees choose their manager. And this has dramatically cut voluntary turnover. And people are happy and excited because they get to work with a person they trust, that they feel psychologically safe with, that they're excited to learn from and grow with and report to and have that communication. So just imagine what that can do for morale and for innovation when people can choose their own manager in the workplace.
I think that's a remarkable example and one I would never have anticipated, Tracey.
Yeah.
And now it's a small company. So if there were 2,000 people, it'd be maybe a little harder for you to find the right match, but not to say that
probably not, because even when in large companies, and we've worked with companies, hundreds of thousands of employees, you could try this by a department. Most people, you're still working in small teams, right? And so it's not hard to be like, I really like working with them. Now people might say, yeah, but what if that person's a manager and nobody chooses to work with them? Then probably they shouldn't be a manager. How often do people get promoted to management because they're really good at a skill? They're not meant to be managing or leading or people. Again, it's giving power to your people. That's the distinction we're talking about here. It's not power to the top. It's power to your people. Let them be adults. Treat them like adults. Let them choose their manager or coach or boss or whatever word you want to put on it. Yeah.
As we're talking about this, I was thinking about when I design an event. It might be a workshop. It might be a class. It might be a retreat. One of the things I always look for in the design is, where can I give the audience and participants a choice? And it drives people crazy who I work with because they think, yeah, this is what we should be doing. I said, but we can do it in two different ways. And if people can choose the way, they just feel like they have more agency and they have more power. And
that's
so
right.
They bring more of themselves.
Yes, it's all about power to the people. That's what democracy is. It's power to your people. And when you do that, you get tremendous results. Can I share a story, Madeline?
Absolutely.
Okay, we're in a time right now, there's a lot of global uncertainty. I'm working with CEOs. People are very stressed out. I've spent my morning today on calls in masterminds with CEOs I work with. And from all different industries, people are very stressed out over inflation, over great resignation, over trying to keep things going. And again, currently we have clients in 35 countries worldwide. So people are a lot of CEOs are very on edge about all of the global issues going on. And I tell a story in the book about this. During the Great Recession, we were working with a very large company of 120,000 employees, multinational company. And the CEO ran the company on democratic principles. And they got to a point where they could see that with the economic recession, which is probably what we're heading into now, that they were going to have to cut jobs and save $100 million. And if they couldn't find a way to save $100 million, which is a huge chunk of money, they were going to have to let people go. And they didn't want to have to let people go. So what the CEO did was, again, instead of being this conventional, traditional leader, which would just carry all the weight on their shoulders, or go to the executive team and just say, I don't know, just let people go, which is sometimes the most uncreative thing that you can do, right?
Yeah.
He said, you know what? Again, let's give power to our people. And let's give them choice in a way, but let's give power to our people. And so he went to the internal blog and he went out to everybody. He said, look, I'm just going to be straight up with you. Again, principle of transparency. These are all principles I talk of democracy I talk about in the book. And he says, we got to save $100 million or people are going to lose their jobs. What ideas do you have? So that took humility, that took grace to come forward and say, I don't know the answer. Do you all have answers? Madeline, they had hundreds of ideas come in. They implemented 76 of them. And instead of saving $100 million, they saved $260 million. And no one was let go. So that's what we're talking about here, is when you give power to your people, tremendous things can happen. And two of the CEOs I was working with this morning on one of my masterminds have implemented this very concept. And it takes humility as a leader to come forward and say, I don't know what to do. But that mobilizes the full strength of your people. Everyone's in it together. Let's solve this problem, and amazing things can happen.
As Tracey was talking, she was talking a lot about teams. And a lot of the work that we do today is done through teams. Mark Samuel is the author of Reimagining Teams, a great book that can open your eyes to see teams from a totally different perspective. His most recent book is Making Yourself Indispensable. Mark is a transformative leader with over 30 years of experience in the business world.
It's a great question, and there's so much emphasis today from several books, but there's a great focus on habits, and really habits are the things that create change. The problem is that teams have to have team habits, not individual habits. They have to be collective habits. Whether it's a baseball team turning a double play, whether it's a basketball team on a fast break, whether it's a music group transitioning from one tempo to a different tempo, it's a team habit that makes that happen, not individual habits, all based on individual goals and priorities. It's a team habit. The purpose of habits is it's a practiced optimal behavior such that it becomes so automatic that when I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I don't have to think about what to do next. That's the issue. It's like, we're going to get stressed and overwhelmed. You either take the time to think about it and then muddle through it and then go into restriction because we're feeling the crisis and the pressure, or we've practiced the habit so much, we just automatically show up and do it. That's what sports teams do. That's what music.
Can you give me a business example of what did you call it? An optimal behavior, a practice.
A team habit. Yeah, absolutely. One team habit could be, how do we surface and solve problems? So how do we know to do that? Right now, in most organizations, when a problem shows up, the individual who feels the pressure of it starts to solve it. And it's the most natural thing to do. But if we're going to function as a team, that's not going to work, because your solution could create 3 more problems for other people. So we have to have a habit which says when there's a problem that affects other people, we surface it to the team right away. As a team, we discuss what's the criteria for successfully solving this problem so that it has the least negative impact on either any function or the customer. Then we go through our process of sharing ideas in an open space until we collectively, based on the timing, so we can't just postpone it, we have to make a decision, great, and then we set up a recovery plan that if it doesn't work, here's how we're going to reconvene to modify that decision. That would be, a habit is a collection of competencies.
Got it.
See, right now, most organizations focus on isolated competencies, but you can have a competency and not apply it well. What a habit is, it's a group saying, based on our constraints, so not based on philosophy, not based on reading anybody's book, including mine, based on the constraints of our reality, what is the most optimal way for us to make the best decision possible, getting as much of the information as possible and doing it in the most timely way. Great. That becomes the habit. Now let's all practice it and do it. And let's do it to the point that when we're pressured, we just know to do that.
Yeah. It does something else, though. The one that you mentioned or described. It also helps people feel more confident to express an interest or an issue, knowing that failure is not individual either, it's team.
Exactly. Oh, it breeds confidence. It also breeds an understanding of expectation. The teams can solve anything. It really gives that level of confidence.
Life in the marketplace is chaotic, even when advice is clear and simple. It must be robust, even when things are ambiguous and filled with complexity. Bruce Waltuck is an award-winning change leader, facilitator, consultant, and teacher. After an encounter with complex system science, Bruce chose to work in the field of complexity.
You could call it the place of ambiguity. You could call it the place of paradox, as you described it, with multiple possibilities. That kind of capacity we resist simply because it's hard for our brains.
We're certainly working for our own comfort and convenience. And is it efficient and effective? Maybe not, but we certainly think that it is, and we want to believe that it is for sure.
That's right.
For sure.
But what I was getting at was the irony is you can't be in a leadership perspective if you cannot deal with a certain amount of ambiguity.
I agree.
You don't even get on the short list for an executive position if you can't deal in ambiguity.
Should not and does not are
yes.
not necessarily the same.
You're right.
I think again, this points back to the fear factor that organizations, again, we all want and wish things were stable, predictable, and controllable. That's that Newtonian mindset. And we want it that way in business, and we want it that way in life, and all kinds of stuff that we just, why isn't it this way anymore? You know, my son just bought his first car that he bought on his own a couple of weeks ago. And in the midst of this current market, you know, when you and I, every car we ever bought, it was how far below sticker price would we get. Now it's how much over do you have to pay?
That's right.
And literally the price went up $3,000 the day after he signed his deal.
Amazing.
Stuff happens, and we are in this turbulence and in this chaos and unknown and unknowability. And how then will we respond? Can we learn to stay calm? And the aspects, and I was just going to say one last thing quickly on that, it involves both the mind and the heart. It's our cognitive things and our affective things. Our emotions are a key factor.
That's right. One of the practices that come out of my work on resilience is things that allow you to get to know who you are at every level. You're right, because the stronger you are in terms of who you are, the stronger you are able to handle this ambiguous stuff. But speaking of which, now I have some recommendations to people to get themselves prepared. But many of our viewers are people who are really serious about their careers. Now you've opened up a Pandora's box for them. What do you recommend for them? How can they prepare themselves for this?
Great question. So the first thing I would say is just do a little bit. It doesn't take much. There are things you can read to get very great insights in 10 pages, as it were, about this complexity stuff. There are some really seminal papers in this field and discipline. The folks who came up with some of this, what kinds of situations we're in and what is the optimal pattern of response. Originally, Cynthia Kurtz and David Snowden were working together when Dave was at IBM over in England. I happen to know both of them now for many years personally. And so there's a paper, and I think it was 2003 was the first paper. It's Kurtz and Snowden. In 2007, there's a very famous and influential paper, I think a prize-winning paper, that was in the Harvard Business Review that Dave Snowden is the lead author with Mary Boone. So the Snowden and Boone paper, which is called The Leader's Framework for Decision Making, is an extremely well-known and influential piece that's very short and will give you some of these kinds of insights. I suppose I could put a plug in for myself. If you look up Bruce Waltuck's SlideShare, you'll see I have a presentation called The Problem with Problems, one that I've done for a number of different professional groups. And it's very much, if you just glance at the slides, you'll get some of the stuff that I've been talking about today.
My next clip is from Diana Whitney. She's the founder and president emerita of the Corporation for Positive Change, a consulting firm dedicated to the creation of appreciative organizations. She is an internationally recognized consultant, an inspiring keynote speaker, and a pioneering thought leader on many topics. She's written and co-authored many books, with her latest being Appreciative Leadership, focus on what works to driving winning performance and build a thriving organization. Diana Whitney. You didn't use it, but I'm gonna introduce it because many of my guests have used the term appreciative inquiry. And when I ask them to describe it, I'm never satisfied. But I know that you can give language to that, because so that path that you just described was really an appreciative path.
Let's again play with the language that you began with, and that is curiosity. Inquiry is curiosity. We can call it research. When you're in the university, inquiry is research. When you're a consultant, doing inquiry might be a survey or research, but it's curiosity. And so appreciative inquiry asks us to be curious about what works, to really put our attention on people's strengths, high performance patterns, on what makes things work well. As an example, I was recently reading about a favorite artist of mine from Taos, New Mexico. And at one point, she spent a year with a camera studying beauty. That's all she did. This is Agnes Martin. She didn't paint. She didn't do the work that she's known for. She just spent 1 year dedicated to the discovery of beauty through the lens of her camera. Now that I would call appreciative inquiry. She was curious, she was looking for beauty, and she wanted to expand her possibilities of beauty. Now, I'm sure that influenced her art when she came back to painting, right? So appreciative inquiry is the study, the questions about, the curiosity about what works well when life is at its best. Now, the one thing I will say, Madeline, there's a caveat. We know it's just not. I wake up grumpy some days, right? I have days that are going smoothly that I look around and I go, and then there's other days I go, why are they doing that? Yeah. And we've got a lot of the why are they doing that in our lives these days. But the antidote to that is the curiosity about goodness, about beauty, about success, about what works well, about joy. We can add a lot to our inquiry to really expand our repertoire of positive possibilities?
The word that really hit me was that word beauty. What a magnificent thing to decide, because I bet if people looked at all the photographs that she took, they might say, oh, that's beautiful. Why did you photograph that one? Where's the beauty there? And yet I suspect that if you thought about it, you just sat back and then you would see the beauty in it. I remember when I went to the Wharton School, they asked a question. Oftentimes when you go to graduate school, they ask you to write essays. You had to say 3 things that were important to you. And of course, you really thought about the first one and you really thought about the second one. And the last one, you always put in money because this is the Wharton School. And it turned out, and I found out this later, many years later, that in admissions, they only looked at the second one. They said, because the first one, you're gaming it. And the last one is always finance. But it's the middle one. And my middle one was beauty.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
I'm curious what beauty means to you, because when we take beauty, a word like beauty, a concept like beauty, we also, as you pointed out, understand that it means different things to different people. And so I'm curious to you, Madeline, what does beauty mean?
Oh, I'm getting chills to say this. To me, beauty is something that opens your heart.
Mm.
And it could be a beautiful landscape, or it could be the face of a grandmother as she holds the grandchild. Wrinkled, gnarled, but what is the love? So that's how I define it. I don't know how other people do.
I want to add to that because we're talking about success in career. In my experience, beauty is also a job well done.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's when people, yes, we worked late, we put in some extra hours, but then we sat back and look at the book that came out of our work. Oh my gosh, people are just having such a great time at this meeting that we planned. Or, oh, by the way, the moonshot. Beauty can be in the quality of our work, completion of our work. It can also be the joy of a special relationship. It's those relationships where you just go, and it is heart opening. I really love that part of your definition. Yeah, that person is a curmudgeon, but they're beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's understanding and being curious, to go back to that, being curious also about our differences and learning so that when the time comes and we are faced with something that we think we've never faced before, we have a repertoire of resources, behaviors, practices, ideas that we can creatively put together, probably in a new way, and then we can go forward.
Last but not least is David Fessell, Dr. David Fessell. He actually was my first guest when I shifted to television because he is such a joy. He has lots of accolades, but I'm going to let you focus on the aspect of his background that actually, for me, is more impactful than all his medicine. So keep in mind the word improv as you listen in on the conversation with David and my friend Ed Hoffman. Let's talk a little bit about humor as a mechanism to open the mind, just as a start. Ed, why don't you start on that one?
Man, I don't know. I used to read books about explaining comedy, and I remember comedians saying if you start explaining it, it gets boring. You lose it. Maybe it's an analytical part. I think what makes me laugh, and I don't think I'm naturally funny, but I've been told that I'm funny or I make people laugh. I think it's people expect a certain thing, and you break it, and you have fun with that. I think we're so used to being formalized in relationships, being formalized at work, behaved a certain way, that I think humor represents just a complete disruption to normality that makes us enjoy it and laugh.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ed. A lot of times the humor comes from the surprise aspect. I think that's what you're getting at. There's a surprise, a punchline, there's the setup, this rule of threes. They talk about two things that are pretty much similar, and then the third one is very different. That's the punchline. And it can shift our perspective. I'm thinking now, one of my favorite, all-time favorite cartoons, Charles Barsotti. He's famous for dog cartoons. And it's a picture of a psychiatrist's office. A dog is laying on the couch, and another dog is the psychiatrist. And the dog laying on the couch says, "They moved my bowl." It's like this whole shift in perspective. What, a dog? And then, oh, identify with that. I know what it means to feel powerless. It's that shift in perspective that can really open the mind and change our point of view and allow us to see other possibilities and other options and make connections and combine things in very creative ways. If our mind is in this more open, spacious, safe place where we can do this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you also said ahead on something that makes a lot of sense to me, David, which is that there is a familiarity in some ways. I love New Yorker cartoons. Yeah. And when I was at NASA during a certain period of my career, I was traveling internationally a lot. And I was also teaching at the University of Sydney in Australia and that kind of stuff. And I got back from one of the periods where I was away for 2 weeks, and clipped on my desk was a cartoon of a person relaxing on a beach island, totally away from people. And there's a little phone there saying, Ed Hoffman, are you available for a meeting? And that's smart. I get that. I recognize the satire, I guess, and the humor. So that connection, I think, is important.
New Yorker cartoons are terrific. My very favorite New Yorker cartoon is in a wine shop, and the woman is standing there explaining to the man. What I remember is that it really tasted good.
That one, that's the one I want. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a great source. And, the website for the New Yorker cartoons, cartooncollection.com. You can go on there, search by topic, search by subject, find a cartoon for your presentation, for your meeting, for whatever you want. They're not expensive. It's a great source to share good humor and pick ones that resonate with your theme, with your topic. Great source.
Yep. And coming back to that word humor, I think that what I'm drawing from what we're saying is if we can get to that place, we have somehow relaxed our filters so that our minds are more open, which is, of course, what you want if you want a group to really gel and really work together.
Yeah. Laughter signals that it's safe. There's a certain degree of safety, safe enough to relax, safe enough to open our minds, safe enough to engage our curiosity, our creativity. It's not the fight or flight space where we're vigilant and on guard and it's life or death, or there's risk and danger. It's a totally different space, a more elevated, open space. And laughter signals that we're in that space and that we can share that space.
This has been a different Unlocked, and I hope that you have celebrated with me and enjoyed these little clips from some of my guests. This is Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.